Back when it opened, the Casbah became very quickly a focal point. You would go there to play music, you would go there to hang out, you would go there to hear other people play. And out of that, people met people, and bands were formed that may not have formed otherwise because there may not have been, one venue that they were all going to go and congregate and hang out at. Therefore, it really incubated a lot of music that came out of here.
Nobody would want to have the kind of music we were playing in their establishment. Yeah, there really wasn't any place to play, and there also wasn't any place we would really want to play, So it was way different, and although there was a bunch of people from scenes or kind of groups of friends that would go there, it was kind of like the meeting place where you met all these other people that lived all throughout San Diego that you never really met before. Some people you wouldn't even see them at other shows or anything. You just kind of see them there, and then that became its own scene.
I was just a fan. I wasn't a person that worked in radio. I had no connection to anything. I worked in construction and for law firms, and I was just a music fan, and this place meant the world to me because there was nothing like it. Mainly because that was the beginning of maybe some youthful energy getting into the city, because it was still such a military town and all these things. It was definitely the beginning.
Me and a couple friends, Peter Verbruge and Rob Bennett, opened a place called the Pink Panther in '86. It was a beer bar with a jukebox, and we had DJs, and it was the first place in San Diego opened by young people for young people.
That was one of the first places I met Tim, and also Bob was working behind the bar at and that was a very cool place, and it was kind of a place where a lot of musicians hung out, and kind of a scene.
I remember just going to see bands like the Dragons and not really being a buddy of Tim, because there was this, I always called it the Casbah elite. There was a thing back then. There were a group of bands. The music scene was all supported by the bands. It's a lot different now. I think we actually have music fans in San Diego. It isn't just the other bandmates supporting. But Tim Mays gave everybody an outlet and a place to play, and it's pretty amazing to think 25 years later, here we are. And that's just the Casbah. You go back, I mean, we're talking more than 30 years of what Tim Mays has made a difference in our community.
See, for me, I distinctly remember being 20, going to San Diego State, and I could not wait to turn 21, not so I can legally go to a bar and drink, so I can go to the Casbah and see shows. It was always a case of, damn, I'm so lucky to be in this room right now. Now I'm one of the cool kids, and there's the guy who's the Don or the godfather of this cool scene. Can I actually meet the guy or interact with him? Let's see.
When we opened the Casbah, we still had the Pink Panther. We hadn't lost our lease yet, so this just became available, and both Peter and I used to Peter used to have a place called Kings Road, where he put on shows back in the 80s. So he and I both had done that, and we just thought, okay, let's just get a place, where we can have some music. And all the local bands started playing there a lot, and that whole scene, early 1990 was pretty much, and that's when I met John.
John Reese's trajectory here in San Diego definitely defined by the Casbah. When you look at his earlier bands like Pitchfork, Drive Like Jehu, which obviously led to Rocket from the Crypt, had his own label, Swami Records, that had bands like Mrs. Magician, Crime. Not only did he serve as their label, but he was the producer as well. Had his radio show. I mean, the Swami sound system on 94.9 was legendary. And then you have his appearances on Yo Gabba Gabba. Are you kidding me? My kids love that show. Also his affiliation with Bar Pink, which he opened from Flags to Little Hurricane. The Style Tones have had a residency over there. I mean, led just a fantastic room that I'm sure he would not have opened if it wasn't for the Casbah and his affiliation and what the Casbah had shown him throughout the years.
I was living with Mike Kennedy, who was in Night Soul Man, and later I played with him in Drive Like Jehu. And I wasn't 21 yet, and he was a couple years older, and he would talk about, oh yeah, we played the Casbah again. We sold out the Casbah. And I was like, oh man, he would come home at like 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, and I'd be on the couch watching some bad late night TV. And he'd be like, yeah, sold it out again, sold it out, the Casbah. And so, I couldn't get into the Casbah. I drove past it all the time. I was like, yeah, I can't wait to see bands there. And I wasn't even thinking it would be great to play there. I was just thinking, I can't wait to get in, to be a part of whatever's happening there. And so finally, yeah, it was the first time I think I went there is maybe when I played there, and I was like surprised by how small it was, because selling it out didn't seem like that big of a, I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, it was about checking out bands for sure, like the punk shows that Tim did, which was where I got my education, seeing bands play. That experience wasn't about watching bands for a lot of people who would go to some of those shows. It was always about seeing the bands for me. That's why I was there, But for a lot of the people, it was about something else, And the Casbah, it wasn't like that. It was like, this is about just having fun, checking out bands.
Mario is really a pillar of the San Diego music scene, leader of the band The Dragons, who, by the count of Mario, have played no fewer than 7 CD release concerts at the Casbah. And he also is a manager of various local acts, and every year he has a few of them playing at South by Southwest in Austin. So he's a pretty pivotal guy.
It was a great touring spot as well. I mean, it was cool to see like the coolest bands from other cities that were on their way up stop at the Casbah and play. You got to check them out before they made it to a bigger level in another venue. And I think they were excited in a lot of ways to play the Casbah as well.
Yeah, it's like John was saying back in the punk rock show days, there was a lot of violence. A lot of people just went there because they wanted to get tough in the pit and, cause problems. So it was a small place, and we owned the place, and we could kind of control it the way we wanted to. So, that's rarely did that behavior happen, but if it did, we didn't tolerate it. We'd toss people out. And so people who were looking for troublemaking opportunities or to be hooligans and stuff, they just didn't come around because they knew that nobody was going to be into that, and we wouldn't allow it to happen either. It's the kind of place where people would come to as a destination. So it's the thing that would get people in is the bands that were playing, and that's all it was. And everybody would go see each other's bands play. I mean, you'd go there any night, and the audience would be 3 other bands, who weren't playing that night, So. Yeah, it was a big group. It was where you'd walk in and you knew probably 80% of the people there on any given night.
So when the Rockets of the world did start coming up, that was like the first time I noticed that there's a scene. When the Casbah started doing its thing, because it was a dingy rock club, they could book everything that was underground, crazy, extraordinary, whether it was Goo Goo Dolls, Monks of Doom, which is a side project of Camper Van Beethoven, and Nirvana, like in the same kind of era. Right. That kind of stuff meant that other clubs started going, well, we got to start doing this stuff as well. So when the scene got bigger, at the same time, Soma started bringing in some of those, underground things. Like Green Day's first gig here, I think, was at Soma, the old downstairs place, technically south of Market, where they got the name from. and the Nirvana's first show was at the Casbah. So if you look at it, it's like when the Casbah first started doing what it was doing, it kind of pushed everybody else to realize, oh, we can do this. We can do this, and other local bands would go down there and play. So Tim, in an effort to round out his programming, if you will, touring bands would come through. Then he'd have local bands open up for the touring things, or he'd have local bands do little showcases.
It was never really meant to be this big signature project that would become a commercial hit, if you will. It was just kind of like this little indie side project for them, but it ended up being the band that got the most traction for both those guys. And in my opinion, Pinback is one of the hands down best bands to come out of San Diego. I love their vibe, their sound. They're so bass heavy, melodic. Their vocal harmonies are insane.
A word of advice, never play pool with Eddie Vedder.
He came to see Jonathan Richman one night, and afterwards we were all hanging around afterwards playing pool in the back room, and somehow he and I ended up playing against each other, and he was a really good pool player, and I wasn't very good at all, but we kind of made a bet that if I won, I would get his publishing royalties, and if he won, he would get the club, and of course he beat me soundly, and he never took ownership, thankfully, but there was a rumor a couple years later that surfaced. I think he was doing a radio interview up in Seattle with somebody, and the story came up somehow. Somebody asked him about it, and he had forgotten too, but then he remembered. Then I started hearing, I think from Mike Halloran, mentioned to me, he goes, oh, I heard Eddie Vedder owns the Casbah? It had kind of just gone down the coast, like a rumor kind of filtered out there. It's pretty funny.
We're the White Stripes from Southwest Detroit, and my name is Jack, and this is my big sister, Mel, John.
Jack White, when the White Stripes played here the first time, he wasn't old enough to be in the club. He had to stand outside. So he was probably 19 at the time, 20.
I think it was like 13. It seemed like it's such a small crowd the first time they played.
Oh yeah, the first time they played, it was like less than 100 people here.
White Stripes, along with a lot of other bands, had this loyalty to the room and to Tim Mays. So anytime the White Stripes, even after they blew up and they were international sensations, if you will, every time they came to San Diego, they weren't getting in bed with the big promoters, the Live Nations of the world. They were still committed to the Casbah.
Ice-T came, there was a trade show in town, the ASR trade show. This was right after we first opened, actually, and some clothing company put on a show, and they had booked Uncle Joe's Big Old Driver and Lit and Korn, when Korn wasn't really well known outside of Orange County at the time, and they were headlining it, and the crowd got really, really ugly. I mean, it got ugly to the point where we just stopped letting people in, because they had handed out like probably 500 or 600 free passes to get in, the people organizing the show. And we, the crowd was really, really gnarly and ugly. Orange County, you know, a bunch of dirt bags. And so we stopped letting people in, you know, and at one point Ice-T showed up, and our doorman didn't recognize him and wouldn't let him in. And I remember Ice-T said to him, well, is it a money thing? And pulls out a wad of hundreds, you know. And I happened to just see out of the corner of my eye as he was walking away. I went back and said, go get him, let him in, you know. And so he came in for a little while. I first met O back in the early 80s when he was working for Golden Voice, kind of Golden Voice would bring over bands from the UK and send them out to all the various West Coast destinations to help play for the airfare. And O used to be their, well, back then we didn't even call it a tour manager, right?
It was just
the chaperone.
Correct,
Yeah, O would be
it
their
wasn't a
tour
tour
guide,
manager.
basically. And he would always be down here with bands like what, GBH, Toy Dolls,
Every band pretty
Yeah.
much that was from Golden Voice.
Exploited,
Most English
all
bands.
those English bands. So
The
that's
Jesus
where
and Mary Chain,
yeah,
most of all.
Jesus and
Remember
Mary
back in
Chain,
the-
yeah,
Jesus and
Lions
Mary Chain,
Club.
There's really like 5 O's because like you'll see them down at Lou's Records sitting out checking out stuff, and then remember one time I was watching MTV and there was a No Doubt press conference and it panned off to the side and O was sitting there leaning in. You know, it's kind of like that Forrest Gump thing where he appeared in every historical event. It's kind of like O.
O is literally a bigger than life figure in not only here but beyond. He came up in the early days of the Casbah playing in a band named Fluff, and went on to really to mentor. Not only was he significant in terms of playing in bands and helping to get things going, but he has mentored so many different musicians over the years, from John Reese and the guys in Rocket to Blink-182.
I went to see Pearl Jam in probably '93 at the Civic Theater downtown, and we're sitting there, you know, and it's like all packed and stuff, and they're on stage, and you look over the monitor. That's O? What O's doing the monitors for Pearl Jam at the Civic Theater? I mean, that sums up the guy. He's everywhere.
Of all the places I tour a lot, and of all the places around the whole entire country, there's no place, no one could ever dream a place like San Diego. And as far as how like it works as a music place, if you go to Los Angeles, you won't find anything like the Casbah in Los Angeles. Nothing, not one place. You might find it maybe in Seattle and maybe in San Francisco, maybe one place on the East Coast, but nothing is like the Casbah across the whole entire country. And I've been across the country 50, 60 times touring with bands, and nothing is like the Casbah.
I think that's like about that time was like what epitomized like in bands still today. You don't feel like a band until you play the Casbah. And at the same time too, I think I went from the Texas Tea House in Ocean Beach to the first show at the Casbah, and that's the same thing when I kind of felt like, you know, I was a real band and we were doing some real stuff, and it made you more serious about playing and writing songs and being more of a serious band because you sometimes get to open for cool touring bands that were going through.
I think there's a real cachet to playing there. A really good example I could give you in 1995, Alanis Morissette, who had already exploded, her management figured that it would be really good for her credibility as a hip underground artist, even though she was anything but a hip underground artist, for her to come and play at the Casbah, and they filmed her here for an MTV special.
We'd played shows other places, and they were always like, you know, makeshift, and, you know, played the Shea Cafe, which was a great petri dish of different people meeting each other, and it was a cool scene going on. But playing the Casbah was like, it just felt a little bit more like what I was doing was legitimized. You know, it's like we're a real band. You know, this is a real thing now.
Hasn't changed, and I think that's part of what the magic is that every time you enter it, you feel like you're at home. The same lawn jockey greets you at the door. You've got the old Pink Panther logo or poster or mural in the back. You got the same Miss Pac-Man machine or Galaga or whatever. A lot of the same bartenders work in the room, the same lights, the same funky bathroom. I mean, it is what it is, and I think that's part of the magic. It's like putting on an old sock or an old sweatshirt or hoodie.
There's a lot of things you can do in San Diego. So a lot of people don't look at the scene as a scene. Like, you can go surfing, mountain biking, road biking, snowboarding, skiing, whatever it is. Like, there's so much other stuff to do. Where when you come from an industrial place like Detroit, Minneapolis, Seattle, where it rains a lot, it's cold, the scene happens. Yes, the scene happens because it's the only thing you can do.
Given, again, the timing was everything. Today, there are, you know, any number of venues that an indie band here can go and play at. Back then, there weren't. and therefore it was like a magnet.
There's magic in that room. It really is. And it really just defined a scene and gave these indie rock bands a place to play and people like myself a place to go.
You gotta wait till the devil brings you back.